In 1981, the story starts in San Francisco. Chris is attempting to support himself through the sale of portable bone density scanners. He drops his son Junior off at daycare every morning and heads out to sell the scanners to as many hospitals as he can. Sadly, the scanners' high cost and lack of necessity make them difficult to sell. Chris frequently encounters a weird homeless individual who refers to the scanner as a time machine when he rides the bus. Chris asks his wife Linda to pick up their son when he needs to remain out late trying to close a deal. Linda finds this upsetting because she frequently works 2 shifts to provide for her family. During supper one evening, Chris discovers a Rubik's Cube. Linda received this well-liked new toy as a gift from her buddy. When Linda inquires about Chris's tax payment, he responds that he will file for an extension. Linda gets even more agitated over this that evening. Chris solves the Rubik's Cube rapidly after playing with it. The following morning, Chris witnesses a man stepping out of an opulent sports car while out on his usual walk to generate sales. The man replies that he is a stockbroker when Chris asks what he does for a living. Chris believes that a college degree is required for that kind of work, but the man replies no. A strong mathematical background is sufficient. Chris believes he deserves that kind of life for himself after observing how content the firm's staff is. When Chris gets home the next morning, he informs Linda that he will be staying late to apply for a job as a stock trader at an office. Linda laughs at him, thinking it's a stupid notion. An argument ensues as Chris becomes agitated and warns her not to speak to him in that manner. Linda tells him that they still owe 2 months' rent, which puts an end to their argument. Chris later applies for the position at a brokerage firm. Every 6 months, the company hires 20 candidates, but only one of them is motivated to appear good. Chris begs a street-singing hippie girl to watch his scanner inside the company in exchange for some cash. As Chris begins researching the position and receives an application, he is startled to see the girl scurrying off with his scanner while holding the application. Chris pursues her through the station and the city, but she manages to get away by boarding a train. The following day, Chris promises Linda he will sell the scanner so they won't be able to see it anymore, but not before stopping by the office to turn in his application for a job. To create a good impression, he wishes to meet with Jay, the manager. Jay claims to be busy and will call you later. Chris then spots the hippie girl and her scanner-wielding pal. He becomes enraged and begins to pursue them. Although hospitals and doctors don't need those scanners, he spent all of his money on them since he believed they were revolutionary. Chris compares losing a scanner to losing a month's supply of groceries after a long day of running. Chris now retrieves the scanner after spotting the couple on the bus. Instead of having 1 scanner that he could have sold, he has 2 when he gets home. Despite her deep disappointment, Linda keeps quiet because it's Junior's birthday. After spending some cash on a basketball for Junior, they want to make him happy. However, when Junior is occupied, Linda informs Chris how angry she is at his negligence. When Chris visits Jay a month later, he wants to know what happened to his application, but Jay is rushing. Jay is preoccupied with solving his own Rubik's Cube and becomes angry when Chris keeps failing to solve it, so Chris claims he's heading in the same direction so they can take a taxi together. When the cab gets to Jay's location, Chris grabs the cube from him and solves it. Jay is so impressed that he jumps out of the taxi before Chris can pay. Since he clearly doesn't have any money, Chris exits the vehicle at a signal and flees, prompting the taxi driver to pursue him frantically. Chris dashes into the train station and boards, only to have the train violently close on his hand and force him to drop his scanner there. Chris's entire schedule has been pushed back by this, and when he apologizes to Linda, she gets furious because she missed her shift to pick up Junior and they needed the money. She declares that this is the last straw and that she is taking Junior with her when she leaves. I'm devastated to learn that their son and everything she owned at the time of the deal were taken. Jay calls Chris and instructs him to jot down his secretary's number so that he can call the following day to set up an interview. Chris tries his hardest to commit the number to memory when he can't find a single pen. Then he dashes to a local store to borrow some paper and write the number down. Chris approaches Linda at the daycare the following morning to discuss what transpired. The money situation worsens when the landlord, finally fed up with Chris not paying him rent, comes to ask him to leave the apartment in the morning because painters are coming in. Chris promises the landlord he will pay him soon and that he can do the painting himself, so the landlord agrees to give him 1 more week while Chris paints the walls. Linda explains that she isn't happy anymore, and while Chris can accept her leaving, he won't let her take the kid, so they agree to take turns. After 2 police officers come to his house and take him to the station, he has to pay all of his parking tickets. Sadly, the police officer informs him that they will confirm the payment at 9:30 in the morning, meaning he will have to spend the night in jail. Chris tries to explain that he has an interview the following morning, but his one call is met with disinterest. Chris requests that Linda pick up Junior in the morning. Chris gets released from the firm, but he's almost late, so he rushes to the interview still wearing his tacky firm clothing. Disappointed with what they observe, the interview panel asks Chris to clarify the circumstances, and Jay says he saw him every other time. Chris was dressed appropriately. Because Chris is intelligent, amusing, and clever, he leaves a lasting impact. Jay arrives to congratulate him after the interview, but Chris tells him he would have to think about it because he now knows it's an internship and his circumstances have changed. Jay calls him in the evening and encourages him to go on, saying he will replace his place. Later on in the evening, Linda arrives with Junior and breaks the big news. She's moving to New York to work at her sister's new restaurant, which her sister's boyfriend is opening. Chris, encouraged by Jun Junior's decision to do as she pleases, declares he is keeping Jun Junior because he knows Linda cannot look after him. She gets even angrier when Chris informs her about the internship, and when she's gone, she leaves. The following day, Chris phones Jay to accept the position. Since it's Saturday, Chris and his son moved with the assistance of a friend to a nearby motel. Junior claims he is going to be a professional basketball player when Chris takes his son to play. Chris comforts Junior after he realizes that most people don't succeed by telling him that no one, not even himself in the future, should ever tell him he can't accomplish something. When they eventually make a sale and get sufficient cash to tide them over for a few more days, they proceed to the hospital to offer the scanner. Chris leaves for his first day of the internship the next morning, when he is introduced to the trade. Chris never lets anyone know that he's destitute. Instead, he works really hard to demonstrate his superiority for the job. Chris runs into his boss, Mr., on the street during lunch, and they strike up a conversation. Chris wants to lick some boots to increase his chances. Still believing it to be a time machine, he stops himself when he realizes that the crazed guy is in possession of the scanner. Chris follows him right away, following him through the traffic and down the street before getting struck by a car. Chris plays it cool for a few days until losing sight of the person and losing a shoe. In that state, he returns to the office. Chris continues to help the office manager. To make matters worse, Frack continues to call clients in an attempt to gain access, but to no effect. Chris needs to finish the same task as the others in less time since he has to leave early to pick up Junior. Chris never hangs up the phone as a result of this. Never use the restroom or drink water. Chris makes a daring phone call and chooses one day to complete the list out of order in order to speed up the process. He succeeds in getting an appointment with a senior pension fund manager. Chris tries to bolt from the premises when Mr. Ribbon orders him to report to his office in 20 minutes, but Frisch stops him and urges him to park his car someplace else, as he has nowhere else to go. Chris tries to park as quickly as possible, but by the time he gets to the meeting, Ribbon has already left. The next morning, Chris visits Ribbon's house under the pretense that he is just passing through and apologizes once more. Then, he pretends to be taking Junior to the football game, and Ribbon tells him he is bringing his child along as well. Chris tries to make a sales pitch to Ribbon, but despite Ribbon's admission that he likes Chris, he isn't interested. Chris obtains the cards of Ribbon's wealthy friends, who are more interested. Chris struggles for weeks to make ends meet between his internship and scanner sales, but eventually the IRS comes to raid Chris's bank account to collect overdue taxes, leaving him destitute and helpless. When Chris tries to get the money back from an old friend who helped him move, the guy claims he already paid him. Chris becomes enraged, but his pal simply shuts the door behind him. Later on, as Chris is out at the park with his son, they run into the insane guy with the scanner once more. Chris immediately chases after him and gets his broken machine back. Chris now cleans it and attempts to sell it to the doctor, but sadly, the device isn't functional. Upon their return to the motel, Chris and Junior discover that their belongings are outside and that the lock has been altered due to non-payment. Chris tries unsuccessfully to pick the lock and open the window, thus they are now homeless because his friend won't open his door. Chris takes Junior to the train station, and while they're waiting for the train, Junior points out that the scanner isn't a time machine like the crazy guy said. Chris tells him that it is and starts a game to cheer Chris up, pretending they travel through time and can see the dinosaurs. Then Chris announces, "Good cavemen need a cave," so they sneak into the station's bathroom and lock the door. The duo spends the night there on a blanket of toilet paper, and while Junior is asleep, Chris allows himself to cry the next day. Chris and Junior go to a homeless shelter. They are not allowed in because it's only for women and children, but they hear about another shelter. They run there very quickly because there are only a few spots left. And the line is long. They reach the entrance just in time when there are only 4 spots left. A person tries to cut in line to take the last spot, but Chris fights him back when security finds out the person cheated. Chris gets the last room in the shelter. Chris studies for the internship exam every day and tries to fix the scanner with what little light is available. He packs a few items for work and explains to his co-workers why he is carrying bags. Because of the cards he gathered on test day, Chris brings some clients to the practice. Despite his extreme nervousness, he leaves shortly after finishing. Chris gets to meet FR, who just stepped out of a cab. FR begs Chris for $5 to cover the cost of the taxi because he is running late. Chris doesn't seem cruel because he can't afford to give the money away, yet he still does it. Chris and Junior miss the shelter due to this delay, so they wind up sleeping on a train. The next day, Chris CH donates blood in exchange for cash. He purchases a scanner part with the money. They arrive at the shelter on schedule today. Finally, Chris fixes his machine in bed. Junior fears that he is the reason his mother left. Chris consoles him, telling him the next day they sell the scanner and it wasn't like that. That weekend, Chris secures a hotel room to help Junior recover. On his last day as an intern, they spend time together at the beach to bond and unwind. Chris and Jay meet in the restroom. Jay tells him he did a wonderful job later and congratulates him on bringing in a lot of clients. Chris receives a call at FR's workplace. He hears wonderful news from Father Chris obtained his desired job. He begins work tomorrow to formally make it so. Chris receives his $5 back from FR. Chris bursts out of the building in happy tears. This is happiness, he claims. Chris then goes to pick up his son. He gives him a strong hug. They are prepared to start over. Chris later launches his own business. He makes millions of dollars selling a portion of it. In addition, he successfully writes a book about his experiences. I appreciate you seeing.